This video is brought to you by Print My Video. More on that later. Hi, would you like to see Geometry Nodes attributes in your viewport or even render them out like these random numbers on the icosphere? That's what we're going to do today. My name's Chris, glad you're here. Let's do this. Here I am in Blender 2.93 Alpha. This is the very latest version. I just downloaded it, so if you want to follow along. And also for all the Geometry Nodes stuff, you always want the latest Alpha version. 2.93 is still in Alpha currently. Also, to do this, what we're going to do today, you also need animation nodes, and you're also going to need the very latest version of animation nodes. Okay, so we're going to combine geometry nodes and animation nodes. Cool, let's start. First of all, I'm going to go in here and add the icosphere that we saw before. Maybe scale it up a little. I'm going to switch over to Eevee for this just to have a faster viewport here. Then we're going to GC. I will also switch on the screencast key so you can see what I'm typing down here, and the cursor highlighter so you can see where the mouse is a little bit better. Okay, so now we have this. Now let's go into geometry nodes and create a new node tree. Zoom in a little, and the first thing we want is we want to instance an object onto each vertex. So we're going to use the vertices for our points, the real geometry of this icosphere. And we're going to instance, let's say, a hexagon, which was what you just saw in that little animation there. So we add a circle with 6 vertices, and here we have our hexagon. GX, move it over a little, go into edit mode, hit F to give it a face. So now we have something that we can actually see. Okay, now back to this object. We want to point instance this circle. It's called circle, although it's a hexagon. And then we get this. Of course, that's not what we want. So there's a difference here. If you use the geometry of a real mesh in geometry nodes and you instance the objects to that, the objects are all aligned based on their original alignment. If you have a point cloud, so if you do a point distribute, like here, point distribute, and then you have points, and then these points are aligned on the normals of the original object. So these, what we want are hexagons that are basically on the icosphere, right? So they're laying on the surface. Now they are all facing in the same direction. That's not good. And that is where this line rotation to vector node comes in. Maybe you've never used it before, but you want to use it for this. So we want to align the rotation of our points. Pivot should be auto, factor float, which is 1. This is good. We don't want vector. We want an attribute, and the attribute is the normal. This is a default attribute in geometry nodes. I have an entire video here on the channel. In fact, it is the last video here. So if you're interested in what you can do with the normals here in geometry nodes, since this is also quite new that we have this, that's what we want. And you can see we have our hexagons on the surface. I hope this is working correctly. We will see. First, we have to also take a scale node and maybe scale that down a little to something like 0.1. Yeah, looks good. So they're laying on the surface. Okay. Now to make this more interesting, we don't want to scale this down 0.1. We actually want some random scales, some random numbers. So we're going to introduce a new attribute with the attribute randomize node. So on each vertex of our icosphere, we're going to get a new attribute, a random number between, let's do 0.1 and 0.3. Okay, and we want to set this random number into a new attribute, and we're going to call it rand. So now each point has an attribute called rand, and instead of scaling it to just a fixed 0.1, we want to scale it to an attribute called rand. So now each hexagon has a different scale, different size. Cool, so this is already getting there. Now, we also want to see our original icosphere underneath. How do we do that? Well, we can just, here is the point where we're replacing the original geometry, the icosphere, with the new geometry, all of those hexagons. And really all we want, or all we need to do, is join the original geometry with the new geometry. So now we have both. Okay, so we can see on each point of the icosphere we now have a hexagon laying on top of it. Over here it's probably easier to see. How about I switch this to some matcap? Okay, so, and over here we have the rendered view. Now what we can also do is we can pick our circle or hexagon. We can go to the modifiers, give it a solidify, and then give it some thickness, like this. And then we can of course also add another modifier, a bevel, and just give it a little bit of bevel like this. Okay, so now each instance over here looks like this, and that looks interesting, and they have a random size. Now you're here for how do you actually visualize or get these numbers into your viewport and your render, right? And this is where animation nodes comes in. So I think we're done here. We know that it's called rand, this attribute. And now really the trick is that we can access this random or this custom attribute called rand in animation nodes. Thanks to the wonderful Kuldeep Singh, who actually implemented these extra nodes in animation nodes, and you're going to want his build of animation nodes, and you can find the links down in the description where you can download the latest version, because only the latest version has those new nodes. Okay, let's go to animation nodes. We're gonna need a new node tree. First of all, we're gonna need our icosphere, right? So we can do, we're actually gonna need the mesh. We want the position of these points of the icosphere. So these points, these, the vertices, the locations of the vertices. Okay, how do we get that? We can go mesh, input. We can pick our icosphere. And then we have the mesh here and we have the vertex locations. Let's plug in a 3D viewer and see, hold on. Okay, then we crank up the size here and we can see, yes, we're getting the locations of all of the vertices of the icosphere. Cool, so we have those. Now we want to place a number there, right? We want to access that random number, and we want to have the text actually visible. So what we're gonna need is a text object. Let's add that quick, Shift A, text, and we can move that over to the side as well. We can also go in here, go to the text, and then play with the geometry. Maybe we want to extrude it a little bit, and we could also do a bevel and stuff like that. Okay, so now we have one text object. Let's go back over here. Now we need to object instance our text object. So let's just pick it, text object. How many instances? Well, the same amount as we have vertex locations on our icosphere. So now we have a bunch of objects, they're all here. So now we have to place them, object transform output, those objects to a new location. And the location is this vertex location. So now we have all these texts over here. Okay, let's go back to our text. We're gonna set the alignment to center. Okay, then we're also going to change the size, which we can do, where is it here in the font? So we can make them smaller. We just want little tiny text objects. Cool. Now, this looks interesting, but one thing we want, they are all facing up, right? So we can't read them from the camera view. So what we can do instead is, or what we can do to fix this is, let's take our text object here, go to the constraints. Where are they? Here, constraint. We're gonna do a track 2, and we want to target the camera. And instead of minus a C, because now this is like flipped over, we want Z. So now you can see that here's the camera, there's the text, and the text is facing the camera. So now we can't see that one. And these haven't changed, and that is because we have to enable deep copy and copy full object. Do we even need deep copy? No, we just need full object, which includes the modifiers and constraints. Right. So now all of these, you can see they all have this track 2 constraint. You can see these little lines here, and they're all facing the camera, which is cool, because they're being like rotated. Every single one is facing the camera, which gives you this very cool looking effect here. So you can always read the text. But of course, some of them are like stuck inside. So what do we want? We want to lift them off the surface along the normals. But we're doing that in animation nodes now. So how does that work? Well, first of all, we're gonna need the normals, right? There is a mesh info node in here, which gives you the vertex normals. But the cool thing is, you don't really very often need this mesh info node, because the mesh object input node already has that info. It's just not enabled by default. So what you do is you hit N to bring this panel up, and then on this node, on the item here, you can see you can enable the vertex normal output, and then you have it here. So we don't need that extra node. Okay, now we want to add this vertex normal to our vertex location. So we need some vector math. Vector math, add. We take the location, we add the normal, and this is our new location. So what do we have now? Now they're lifted off, which is what we wanted, but it's kind of a lot. They're too far away now. So we need another vector math node. We take that normal, we multiply it by 3.2, or we can just slide it. So you can see we're lifting off the text objects just a little bit so that they're not stuck inside of the object. Actually, we need more than that. Okay, something like this. And they're all facing the camera, which looks cool. How about we give these guys a little bit of a material so we can see what we're doing better. Okay, let's go to the icosphere, give it a new, where's my material? Down here, give it a new material and make it bluish. Okay, and we go to our thing that's called circle, which is actually a hexagon. We make that, I don't know, orange, the Blender colors. Okay, and then the texts, we have to go to this one here, give it a new material, make that, I don't know, metallic, darker orange, something like this. Okay, let's look through the camera view here, and we have this. Now we don't have much light over here, but that doesn't matter. You can see that we're getting the effect that we wanted. Let's also go back into the text here, maybe zoom in and give this a different font. Have no idea, something, and then also give it a little bevel, just one resolution, tiny little bevel, so that the edges can catch the light a little bit better. Also, let me switch on the lights here and maybe give this light, bring it forward a little and give it a little bit more power, so we have light back here. This video is brought to you by Print My Video, where you can use any YouTube video or upload your own to create some very cool looking, vibrant pieces of art from your video, like this one that you see back here. And this is actually a video I made on a trip to Paris that I took with my family a few years back. Remember vacations? So I ordered another one, and this one, which is very big, this is a music video that I made for my brother's wedding. So this is going to be a present for him. And the way this works is it takes the entire video timeline. So it starts here and ends here, the entire video. And these are the actual frames of the video. So you can see all the colors and everything. And then the audio waveform is this, like what gives it this amplitude here to make it look way more interesting. And this style that you can see back there and the one that I have here, this is called the iris because it looks like the iris, right? So if you want your own custom made print to hang on your wall from your video, maybe your vacation, your wedding, your favorite music video, whatever, go to printmy.video and use the coupon code CRISPY to get 10% off on the checkout page. Thanks, PrintMyVideo. Let's go back to the tutorial. Okay, so now we have a bunch of text objects. Cool. But, of course, they're just all saying text, which is not what we want. And now, finally, we're getting to the part that this tutorial is actually about, and that's these two nodes here in the object get custom attribute and set custom attribute. And yes, those are those attributes that we can manage with geometry nodes. So what we want is we want to get an attribute. We want this same icosphere. So before I do that, I'm going to scroll up here. Where is it? The object input. I'm going to take this icosphere, put it in here, and then plug that in here and in here. So we have just one object input picking the icosphere. And then here you can see we can get a custom attribute, and this node tells us, it by default it's set to a and at, but it tells us, hey, there is no such attribute, but there is a rand, scale and rotation, and this rand is exactly the one that we made in geometry nodes. So let's type in rand, and it works. So the arrow is gone. We can plug in a viewer node, and we can see. And yes, we have random numbers. How about I split this view, make this a geometry node so we can see over here what we actually have. So we have numbers between 0.1 and 0.3 coming from the geometry nodes. And yes, we can access them now in animation nodes. So what can we do with those? Well, we want to assign them to all of those text objects, and maybe we want to do some math, like maybe multiply them by 100 to shift the comma, and then maybe round with a math round node. Now these math nodes, and especially the round node, I know that it only works on a single number. It doesn't have any list capabilities. So we're gonna need a loop. Cool. We're gonna need a loop. Let's make a loop. So shift a subprogram loop. This is our input. We're gonna plug in how about we plug in a float list? Because those are floating point numbers. What can we do with this float list? Well, like I said, we're gonna do math. We're gonna multiply the float by 100. Then we're gonna go number round. Take that number, we round it to 0 decimals. Or let's do 1 decimal just to be funny. Then we can convert this to a text. So what I want is that the output of this loop should be a list of text, because that's what we need to plug into those text objects. Okay, so the output should be a text list. And in order to convert a number to a text, we can just drag this over, and Animation Nodes adds a convert to text node for us. So now we need to invoke this. So we select the input W, create invoke node, which gives us this node. And this node now has an input float list, which is exactly or almost exactly what we get out of here. Here it just says value. So we need a convert to float list node, which also Animation Nodes gives us automatically, which is awesome. And then the output is a text list. So now how do we set the text onto these objects? I'm sure there is a menu here, text, input, object, output, object output. Yeah, this looks good. So these objects here, our text objects, we have to enable the text output. We could type a text in here, you can see, or we can plug in our texts. And there you have it. We have visualized our random attributes. Well, not quite yet there yet. Why not? Because we do need deep copy. Because if you think about the text being mesh, which it isn't, but at the end it is, each one has to have its own mesh data inside, or its own text basically inside. And if you don't have deep copy, then they're just instances all using the same text. Right, so just deep copy the text object and then assign the value to it. And then you can see, let me make this a little bit bigger, or let's look over here maybe. So here we have a bigger number, like almost 0.3, which is now 28.7. And we have a very large hexagon with the large number. Here this one is just 15, is a little bit smaller. Down here is 12, which is even smaller. Okay, so now we have visualized our geometry nodes attributes in the viewport, and of course the render, because these are real objects now, you can just render them out. And if we go back here into geometry nodes and we play around with this a little, maybe make 0.4 the biggest one, and then we have to well, it doesn't seem to be updating, even with always on. And one trick in animation nodes sometimes is you have to re-enable deep copy. I don't know exactly what's happening at the moment. What is happening? Deep copy 0.4. 38. Yeah, so now this is bigger. Okay, so it doesn't seem to update the deep copy, which is also something that I've experienced many times before. But if we change these numbers over here, so let's say our smallest one should be 0, and then re-enable deep copy. So now we have really big ones, like almost 40 here, or 0.4. And then we have probably some really small ones, like this one down here. This is just a 4.4. Tiny hexagon there. Okay, and really that is it. You can see the numbers are all facing the camera. So now what happens if I take my icosphere from top view icosphere and I rotate it? For some reason, this is not updating when I'm on always update. This is weird. Hold on a second. Why is this? If I hit execute node tree, it gets executed. Okay, so what if I hit the play, the spacebar for animation playback, and then I take my icosphere. I can't rotate it. Okay, interesting. So yesterday it still worked. Something must have changed in the latest version. Well, since it doesn't work automatically for whatever reason, but it works when we execute the node tree. So if I rotate, execute the node tree. So if you render this out in an animation where a re-execution of the animation node's node tree is triggered every time the frame changes, then you will get the rotation that you saw in the animation before, right? So you can visualize your geometry nodes attributes in the viewport and the render using animation nodes, those new nodes that we have in animation nodes here, the get custom attribute node, and you saw before there's also a set custom attribute node where you can change geometry nodes attributes from animation nodes. And I'm sure I'll think of some tutorial in the future to make use of that. But this is what I wanted to show you in this tutorial. Basically, it all boils down to that one new node get custom attribute. All right, that's it for this tutorial. I'm sure you can come up with more interesting things to do with these new features, with the combination of geometry nodes and animation nodes, because not everybody needs to see numbers, or maybe you do if you do a chart or something. Let me know what you think, and if you come up with something cool looking, please tag me on my socials. You can get started with my file if you want. You can get that from my Patreon page. Thanks to all my wonderful patrons for supporting my channel. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Chris P out.